Welcome to Cryptid Monologues. Here we tell stories of the cryptid kind. We hope to fill your mind with thrilling, suspenseful entertainment. Please relax and enjoy. Thanks for joining. Five-day hike to the Twin Sisters. The journey begins. The Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest stretched out in front of me like an endless tapestry of green, crowned by the icy peaks of Mount Baker itself. The air was crisp, the kind of clean that fills your lungs with invigoration and possibility. This wasn't just a hike. It was a challenge. A 5-day trek starting from the Mount Baker Ski Lodge, winding to the base of the majestic mountain, crossing rugged trails to the Twin Sisters Range, and finally descending to Acme, Washington, where a friend would pick me up. I was alone, and that was how I wanted it. Solitude in the wilderness had always been my solace, my way of recalibrating from the noise and chaos of daily life. Yet, as I prepared to embark on this ambitious journey, a strange energy tingled at the back of my mind. It felt like anticipation, but perhaps it was something more. A subtle warning. Day 1. From the lodge to the wild. The hike began easily enough. The well-trodden path leading away from the ski lodge was alive with the chatter of day hikers and the occasional bark of an enthusiastic dog. But as I ventured farther, the trail thinned out, the voices faded, and I was left with the sound of my own boots crunching against the dirt and the whisper of wind through the pines. The first day's goal was to reach a campsite at the edge of the forest, close enough to Mount Baker's base to feel the chill of its glacier-fed winds. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, dappling the ground with light. I paused often, taking in the beauty of the towering firs and the occasional glimpse of Mount Baker's snowy peak through the canopy. As evening approached, I found a flat spot to set up camp. After pitching my tent and starting a small fire, I settled in with a simple meal of dehydrated stew. The quiet was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. It wasn't until the fire had died down and the stars had fully emerged that I noticed something odd. In the distance, past the tree line, a faint sound echoed. It was a low, resonant call, almost like a howl but deeper, more guttural. It wasn't any animal I recognized, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Telling myself it was just the wilderness playing tricks on my city-softened nerves, I crawled into my sleeping bag and tried to sleep. Day 2. Strange signs. The next morning the air was crisp and cool. I packed up camp and set out early, eager to reach the base of Mount Baker by midday. The trail grew steeper and more rugged, winding through rocky outcrops and patches of dense forest. Every now and then I would stop to catch my breath and marvel at the view. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around mid-morning, I stumbled across something unusual. On the edge of the trail, pressed into a patch of soft earth, were footprints. They were massive, far larger than any humans, with 5 distinct toes and a depth that suggested immense weight. I crouched down to examine them, my heart pounding. They were fresh. I'd read the stories, of course, tales of Bigfoot sightings in the Pacific Northwest. I'd always dismissed them as myths, entertaining but not to be taken seriously. Yet, here was evidence that defied easy explanation. I took a few photos with my phone and continued on. My senses heightened and my pace quickened. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By the time I reached the base of Mount Baker, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. I set up camp in a sheltered spot, using a cluster of boulders to shield me from the wind. That night, as I lay in my tent, I heard it again. The low, mournful call echoed through the darkness, closer this time. My heart raced as I strained to listen. The call was followed by a series of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Whatever was out there, it was big, and it was moving toward my camp. Day 3. The Watcher. The next morning, I awoke to find the area around my camp disturbed. Branches were broken, and the dirt showed signs of large, heavy footprints circling the site. A chill ran through me as I realized just how close the creature had come during the night. Determined not to let fear dictate my actions, I packed up and continued on. The trail led away from Mount Baker, descending into a dense forest that marked the approach to the Twin Sisters Range. The trees closed in around me, their towering trunks casting deep shadows that seemed to move and shift with the wind. By midday, I began to notice more signs of the creature's presence. Strange markings on trees, as if something had scratched the bark with immense force. Odd piles of stones arranged in patterns that didn't seem natural, and always the feeling of being watched. As evening fell, I found a small clearing to set up camp. Exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep was elusive. The sounds of the forest seemed louder than usual, each rustle and snap amplified by my anxiety. And then, just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it again, the footsteps. This time they were closer than ever. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, listening as the heavy steps circled my tent. The creature made no attempt to conceal its presence, its movements deliberate and unhurried. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the steps receded into the forest. Day 4, Confrontation. The fourth day dawned gray and overcast, the forest shrouded in a thick mist. I was nearing the Twin Sisters, their jagged peaks looming in the distance. The trail was barely visible, overgrown and treacherous, but I pressed on, driven by a mix of determination and fear. Around midday, I reached a narrow ridge that offered a breathtaking view of the surrounding wilderness. As I paused to catch my breath, a movement caught my eye. On the opposite slope, partially obscured by trees, was the creature. It was massive, its dark, shaggy form blending with the shadows of the forest. For a moment, we stared at each other across the chasm. Then, with a powerful, almost graceful motion, it turned and disappeared into the trees. The encounter left me shaken but strangely exhilarated. The creature hadn't shown any aggression, only curiosity. Yet its sheer size and presence were enough to remind me of how small and vulnerable I was in this vast wilderness. That night, as I made camp at the edge of a glacial stream, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of connection. Whatever the creature was, it wasn't just an animal. There was an intelligence in its movements, a deliberate curiosity that hinted at something deeper. Day 5, Escape to Acme. The final day of the hike was the most grueling. The trail descended sharply, winding through dense underbrush and rocky terrain. My legs ached, and every step was a reminder of the miles I'd covered. Yet the thought of reaching Acme and the safety of civilization kept me going. As I neared the end of the trail, the forest seemed to grow quieter, the usual sounds of birds and insects replaced by an eerie stillness. I quickened my pace, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. Finally, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, I emerged from the forest onto a dirt road where my friend's car was waiting. Relief flooded through me as I climbed into the passenger seat, my body heavy with exhaustion. "How was it?" my friend asked as we drove away. I hesitated, glancing back at the forest. "Unforgettable," I said finally. And it was. The wilderness had shown me its beauty, its danger, and its mystery. And though I'll never know for sure what followed me through those woods, I'll always remember the feeling of being part of something far greater and more mysterious than myself. casting dreams on the Skagit. The morning mist hung low over the Skagit River, its veil of silver curling around the cottonwood-lined banks. The air was crisp and carried the earthy scent of damp wood and river water. The hum and vibration of the boat's motor was the only sound breaking the dawn's quiet. I was with my friend Dave, a seasoned angler who swore the Skagit was the best spot for coho salmon this time of year. His old aluminum fishing boat, weathered but reliable, glided smoothly through the water. A cooler sat near the bow, ready for the day's catch, while rods leaned against the gunwales, their tips twitching with anticipation. "This is the spot," Dave said, cutting the motor just above the Big Eddy. The boat drifted to a stop near a bend in the river where the current slowed. He handed me a rod already rigged with a shiny spoon lure that glinted like a promise in the faint sunlight. We cast our lines into the green depths. The river was alive with the subtle whispers of moving water, an orchestra of nature that set the tone for our pursuit. Dave, as always, was full of stories. How his grandfather once hauled in a 25-pounder Chinook here, how he'd taught his kids to fish just upstream, and how every bend in the Skagit seemed to hold a memory. Just as Dave was launching into another tale, a loud plunk sounded near the boat. I turned, startled, to see ripples spreading out from where something large had hit the water. "What was that?" I asked, scanning the riverbank. "Probably just a fish jumping," Dave said, though he squinted toward the shore with a hint of unease. Before I could respond, another splash erupted even closer, sending droplets of water spraying onto the bow. "That's no fish," I said, my voice low. My grip on the rod tightened as I turned to face the dense woods lining the riverbank. The morning mist seemed to thicken, curling ominously around the towering firs. Then a third splash, this one unmistakably deliberate, landed just a few feet from the boat. The water churned as the stone, larger than the others, sank beneath the surface. Dave set his rod down slowly. "Okay, that's weird," he muttered, his voice strained. We both froze, listening. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, so deep it vibrated in my chest. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Dave didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the shadowy tree line where something massive moved just out of sight. The branches swayed, though there was no wind. Another rock arced through the air, splashing so close it rocked the boat. "Time to go," Dave said, his voice now a sharp edge of urgency. He reached for the motor, but before he could start it, the growl came again, louder this time, followed by a crashing sound, something heavy breaking through the underbrush. And then we saw it. A figure, towering and broad-shouldered, stepped partially into view. Covered in dark, matted fur, it stood at least 8 feet tall, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It didn't charge, didn't roar, just stood there, staring. "Bigfoot." Dave breathed, the word barely audible. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The creature lifted one massive arm, and another rock tumbled from its hand, landing in the river with a heavy splash. "Don't make any sudden moves," Dave whispered, his fingers trembling on the ignition. I nodded, my heart pounding like a drum. Slowly, he turned the key, and the motor sputtered to life. The sound seemed to startle the creature, and it stepped back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. We didn't wait around to see if it would return. The boat surged forward, the river blurring past as we sped downstream. Neither of us spoke until we were well away from the bend, the mist thinning and the sun breaking through the trees. We finally stopped in a calmer stretch of the river, both of us rattled but desperate to make sense of what had happened. Dave pulled out his phone, his hands still shaking, and dialed a number. "Who are you calling?" I asked, my voice still shaky. "Washington State Fish and Game," he replied, putting the phone to his ear. I listened as he described the encounter, detailing the rocks, the growls, and the towering figure. The person on the other end of the line asked questions: where we were, what we saw, how long it lasted. Dave answered as best he could, his voice growing steadier with each word. When he hung up, he exhaled deeply. "They said they'll send someone out to check the area," he said. "They've had reports before." "Reports of what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Things like this," he said quietly. We sat in silence for a while, the river's gentle flow a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just escaped. When my line finally went tight and I reeled in my first coho of the day, it felt like a return to normalcy. 2 weeks later, it was on a bright, chilly afternoon at the local bait shop when we ran into a Washington State Fish and Game warden we recognized from the call. He was leaning against his truck, chatting with the shop owner, when Dave and I approached him. "Hey," Dave said, clearing his throat. "We called about that incident on the Skagit a couple of weeks ago. You know, the rocks and what we saw." The warden's expression shifted. He straightened, adjusting the brim of his cap. "Ah, yeah, I remember your report," he said carefully. "So, did you find anything?" Dave pressed. The warden hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "We went out there," he said finally. "Checked the area, didn't find anything definitive. No tracks, no scat, nothing like that. But," he paused, lowering his voice, "you're not the first ones to report something unusual in that stretch of the river." My stomach tightened. "What kind of unusual?" "Same as you described," he admitted. "Rocks being thrown, strange sounds, something big moving in the woods. I can't officially say it was, well, you know. But off the record," he leaned in slightly, "keep your eyes open out there. And maybe stick to other parts of the river for a while." "Wait," a voice behind us interrupted. We turned to see a man, probably in his late 50s, wearing a worn flannel jacket and a faded mariner's cap. He looked serious, his face creased with concern. "Did you just say you had rocks thrown at you out on the Skagit?" he asked. "Yeah," Dave said cautiously. "Why?" The man stepped closer, glancing at the warden before speaking. "I was out there last fall near the same bend, I'd guess. Had the same damn thing happen to me. Rocks, growls, something big crashing through the trees. I didn't stick around long enough to get a good look, but I swear it wasn't a bear or elk. Whatever it was, it didn't want me there." The warden frowned. "You never reported it?" The man shook his head. "Didn't think anyone would believe me. Figured I'd just keep my mouth shut. But if others are seeing it too..." He trailed off, looking at Dave and me. "You're lucky to have gotten out of there." The air felt heavier as his words sank in. "Well," Dave said, forcing a thin smile, "that makes me feel better about moving spots." The man chuckled dryly, but his eyes held no humor. "You're smart too." As we left the bait shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Skagit had revealed only a fraction of its secrets, and that some mysteries were better left undiscovered. Shadows on the Crest Trail. Day 1, setting out. The morning sun filtered through the towering pines as the group gathered at the trailhead near Highway 20. Alex, the experienced trekker and de facto leader, handed out maps and reminded everyone of the plan. Joining him were Lena, an enthusiastic nature photographer, Marcus, a novice hiker eager to prove himself, and Sarah, a botanist with a love for the wildflowers of Washington's backcountry. Their goal was ambitious: to traverse the Pacific Crest Trail from Highway 20 to Highway 12 near White Pass in 5 days. Spirits were high as they began, their laughter mingling with birdsong. The trail wound through dense forest, opening occasionally to reveal sweeping vistas of jagged peaks and verdant valleys. By midday, they reached a meadow carpeted with lupines and Indian paintbrush. Sarah knelt to examine the flowers, sharing facts about their medicinal uses. Lena snapped photos while Marcus grumbled about his heavy pack. "You'll get used to it," Alex assured him with a grin. "We've got miles to cover before camp." As the sun dipped low, they pitched their tents beside a bubbling creek. Over dinner, they shared stories under a sky ablaze with stars. The forest seemed alive with whispers, but the group felt at peace for now. Day 2, the first encounter. The trail grew steeper as they ascended into higher elevations. Snow patches lingered in the shadows and the air turned crisp. Lena was ahead, her camera clicking away when she froze. "Guys," she called, her voice tight, "come look at this." The others hurried to her side. In the soft earth of the trail were massive prints. "Cougar?" Marcus asked nervously. Alex shook his head. "Too big. Might be a bear." "It's fresh," Sarah added, pointing to the damp edges of the print. "Let's keep moving." Tension hung in the air as they continued. That night at camp near a rocky outcrop, they built a larger fire than usual. The sound of snapping branches in the darkness made them jump, but nothing approached. They slept uneasily, taking turns on watch. Day 3, strange sightings. Fog enveloped the trail as they pushed onward. The world felt muted, every sound muffled. Around midday, they came upon an abandoned campsite. A tent, torn and weathered, sagged against the ground. Scattered gear suggested a hasty departure. "This is recent," Lena observed, picking up a water bottle. "What happened to them?" "Let's not stick around to find out," Alex said firmly. As they moved on, Sarah spotted something glinting in the bushes, a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. She pocketed it, a strange sense of unease settling over her. That night, the group heard faint singing, melodic and haunting, drifting through the trees. Marcus insisted it was the wind, but Alex and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. No one left the safety of the firelight. Day 4, the encounter in the clearing. The trail leveled out, leading them to a wide clearing surrounded by ancient cedars. In the center stood a solitary cabin, its roof sagging under the weight of moss. Against their better judgment, curiosity drew them closer. Inside, the air was stale and the floor creaked ominously. Dust-covered journals lay scattered on a wooden table. Lena flipped one open, revealing sketches of strange symbols and cryptic notes. "This is like something out of a horror movie," Marcus muttered. Suddenly, a loud thud sounded from the back of the cabin. Alex motioned for silence, edging toward the noise with his knife drawn. They found nothing but an open window, the curtains billowing in the breeze. They hurriedly left, feeling unseen eyes on their backs. As they pushed further that afternoon, the group encountered a chilling sight, an animal carcass strung up in the trees. It was fresh, its blood staining the moss below. "This isn't natural," Sarah whispered, her face pale. The group quickened their pace, hearts pounding with the sense of being watched. That night, their campfire failed to keep the oppressive darkness at bay. They heard rustling and faint whispers, but no source could be found. Marcus swore he saw a figure moving between the trees, but when Alex investigated, there was nothing. Day 5, the final stretch. Exhaustion and tension weighed heavily as they approached White Pass. The terrain grew rugged, and storm clouds gathered ominously. In a narrow ravine, they found themselves face to face with a black bear. The group froze, following Alex's whispered instructions to back away slowly. The bear huffed, but eventually lumbered off, leaving them shaken. Later, they stumbled across another abandoned campsite. This one showed signs of violence. A ripped sleeping bag, the claw marks on a tree, and the faint metallic scent of blood. A weathered notebook lay among the wreckage, its pages filled with frantic scribbles about something following and watching. By late afternoon, they reached the trailhead at Highway 12. Relief washed over them as civilization came into view. They shared a quiet moment, reflecting on the journey. "We made it," Lena said softly, her camera full of memories both beautiful and haunting. Barely, Marcus added, managing a weak smile. As they piled into their car, Sarah glanced at the silver pendant in her hand. Something about the hike had changed them all, leaving questions that might never be answered, and a bond forged in both wonder and fear.